In this episode, we will discuss how to prepare for class critiques and the end of semester reviews.
This is The Hidden Critique, where we discuss art, race, and higher education at the intersection of an MFA. I'm Marlon Tobias, pronouns he, him.
And I'm Krystle and Lemonias, pronouns she, her.
Welcome to our show.
All right, so we are back with another episode, this time talking about the dreaded critique or reviews. Chris, how you doing?
I'm doing well. We're talking about this. This is always a big pause for me, so I'm looking forward to get into why that is the case.
Yes, I mean, Chris, how would you describe your memories of critiques and reviews from grad school?
Well, feedback was conflicting and often ill-informed, so I was quite annoyed most of the time. I just felt annoyed of most of the situations.
Yeah, I mean, I felt as if I was almost being cornered in some ways, and that prior to a review, I had to really just kind of hype myself up. Like I'm like about to start. Well, I ran track, so I'm about to start a race or something. Like I really had to like get myself in gear. But I also felt a need to like also protect myself because you know how critiques are structured. It's basically you are presenting your work from that semester in front of your faculty, and it's almost like in some ways it can be interrogative.
Right.
So you really have to go in there with a certain level of defense. Like you have to, and you know, essentially it is preparing for you to defend your thesis. But you know, sometimes with critiques, it can get a little too personal or too carried away, right?
Yeah.
But critiques overall, especially for artists or creatives, are essential to our development and to our growth. So they do serve a function.
They do. Yes, they do.
So in this episode, even though the process of critiques can be very daunting, leaving you feeling vulnerable, putting yourself out there, I live by Erykah Badu's famous quote saying, "I'm an artist and I'm sensitive about my stuff." The goal of this episode, however, is to inform you of the agency that you have in the critique and review process.
And I love this conversation because this was the strategies that I used and I felt was most successful and that I learned that made me feel a little bit more confident going in. And though what came back to me in the form of comments were always useful, it was the best I could do with what I got.
Right. So yeah, let's get into it. But because mental health is important in life, especially when you're living the artist entrepreneur lifestyle, Chris, how is your heart?
My heart is in two spaces. I am feeling a little tired, but I'm also feeling uplifted because creativity has been really bolstering my energy, giving me a vibe that I can conquer all tribulations. And so, I'm in between those two spaces in my heart today. How about you, Marlon?
I would have to agree with you on the tired aspect. I am a little tired. Being an entrepreneur, being an artist, especially in today's world, it's important to have your hand in different pots. And I think it's important that we acknowledge the amount of stress or the amount of fatigue that you can acquire from having your hand in these different pots and having different projects being done simultaneously. And I also, though, have a feeling of gratitude to the fact that we live in an age where we, especially as Black people, can have the space to acknowledge the fatigue that we have, and we have a language around it, and we can discuss that with a certain level of empathy and compassion, and
Mm-hmm.
not just write it off or just put it on the back burner and say, well, I still have work to do. We're in a time where, yeah, we can say I am tired.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah. In a time where we live in a space where in some states we're being gaslighted to believe that our past and the histories that clearly happened and factually took place are being said that did not took place and was in a different way it took place. I I'm I would say clearly that I'm tired. I feel like I'm tired not just for myself, but for my forefathers. Like this tired is like long. Maybe it's not the physical labor of today and my lifetime, but I feel like the mental capacity that it takes to maneuver in world today, as we're not only working for sustenance, but to frame how our labor should be valued is a lot of work. So I'm grateful to acknowledge how I feel, but at the same time, there's more to be done. And I do believe that this space is going to be a space to talk a bit about how we can continue to work sustainably and hopefully lessen some of this tire that we're feeling.
yes, definitely, definitely. Well, yeah, let's get into it, starting with the definition of critique. Critique and review sometimes at some institutions are used interchangeably, but essentially a critique or review is a detailed analysis and evaluation of a work of art. There is a book actually called the Critique Handbook, and we were actually given this tool first year that we were in grad school. And they offer a little bit more in-depth background into the origins of the critique and its practice. So, Chris, can you provide a little bit of how the Critique Handbook defines what encompasses a critique? What did you find?
Yes, I gladly will share this. This definition not only tickles me, but also infuriates me because because
Infuriates.
yes, because it really is a full-on skeptical. It is a skeptical. The active critique is skeptical, although it's a skeptical that you can learn and grow from, but it's a whole ritual for the artist to develop
Oh, you meant
individually.
spectacle,
A
right?
spectacle, yes, a
Spectacle. Okay,
spectacle.
gotcha.
Developed individually, but positions you to be in the commercial space where you're then questioned again, but maybe in a little bit of a different way. But nonetheless, let me not get ahead of myself. The definition. The words critique, criticism, critical, criton, and many other words around the Greek specific definition of this text. It specifically says comes from the family of Greek words referring to judging, distinguishing, and selecting. While
Mhm.
all, now verbatim, I'm going to share from the text, while all professors often see the critique purely as a place of constructive evaluation, to many art students, the critique is synonymous with Judgment Day coming from that Greek definition, which, yeah, most students feel like it's about to go down. It's literally about to be war. Um,
Wow.
and then it
So
goes
we're
further.
talking about meeting you at the pearly gates judgment day. Like, will you
Yes,
make it through?
revelation. And it goes on to say, the professor's job is to give useful criticism, to deconstruct the object and evaluate its parts with an eye to offer the student practical solutions to perceived deficiencies. The student's role is to distance himself, him or herself, enough from the work so that he or she can consecutively participate in its demise, which
And
is
it's demise.
interesting. In its
It,
demise.
it literally says
That
that.
demise, yes. This dichotomy of the evaluative and the judgmental, already inherent in the critique's linguistic history, sets up the predetermined conflict that is played out in the formal art school critique. I understand this to mean that you should accept that it's about to be a war
About to go down.
while it's about to go down, but while taking it with a grain of salt. So you should kind of step back and not be too sensitive. But it is all sensitive. It is your work. And so I believe in this conversation, it's going to be really important to find strategies to pull back and have a little bit of power in this relationship, in this dichotomy, I should say, more than relationship of the critique, because I do believe the power that faculty has to say what your work is and isn't based on their expertise and their, inherent preferences of work is also subjective, even though it's coming from their previous experience and them being educators that has a plethora of knowledge that they've possibly researched and supports their interests in their specific work. I do believe that there is some power that the student has if they use some of these strategies that we're going to talk through, that in ways levels the playing field of how you are carrying on the critique with your faculty and students that are also around you in this experience.
Yes. And I do also want to preface, we're coming from the place in the process where you feel confident in the school and program that you've chosen, and you also have an understanding of how they look at work, at least on a surface level understanding, because your first semester is and maybe your first year is essentially you still really getting to know the ins and outs of the department and the nuances of the faculty, right? But to position yourself for success as the artist, as the student, I say to begin your program, keeping the end goal in mind, which is thesis. Now, grad school programs for MFAs are usually 2 to 3 years. Ours was 3 years, which gave us a little bit more time to really develop. So I would say with each semester, as you go through each review, end of the semester review, I would say you really want to have about 2 to 3 streams of thought. Especially in your first year, right? I give the faculty and also yourself just the opportunity to go in, take your thoughts or your goals or your style into different directions to see which one falls most successfully. And exploring throughout the semesters, that way you can present a little bit more thoroughly for your final critiques.
Yeah, I do think that's great advice, Marlon. Thinking more about that and based on what you preface in regards to understanding the structure of your institution's critiquing style, I think there's no better way to understand that by having conversations with students in the class ahead of you. So if you're going in as a first year, or even if you're transferring into an institution and you're maybe a second year, having conversations with students that are, if you're a first year, in the second year, or even in the third year, what has their experience of critiques have been? And that also changes based on what faculty is on your list to critique with. So if it's anything like our experience, our structure was that critique were scheduled over a matter of 3 days. Our class size was small, so you had about 8 students that were being critiqued by about, would you say about 8 or 9 faculty members, Marlon?
Yeah, at a time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And those 9 faculty members didn't come every day. So say day 1, you had faculty members, about 3 or 4 faculty members. No, maybe it's about 4 or 5 faculty members. No, maybe more, 4. 4 faculty members for each day assigned.
Mm-hmm.
And
assigned, but there were, in our program anyway, there were 3 or about 4 or 5 faculty members assigned to maybe that particular day or that particular student's critique.
Yeah.
But they still invited or allowed other faculty members to come in to view the critique, which can have some positive or negative impacts. Positive impacts or positive results being in a much more breadth of conversation, but it also can just open up the floodgates for the conversation to really go left, and that faculty member can kind of just overtake the whole room, and they're not even assigned to give their official critical thought. So
in the case of what you've mentioned, where a faculty member is coming in as a visitor and they don't really have a weighted opinion on the official notations that will be taken, that will be put on the record of what your review was actually about, that is not necessarily a good case. So I would say, if you are having visitors in your review that is outside of who is assigned to actually have weighted opinion as a faculty member in that review, make it be someone that will only give comment that will aid in your support. If truly aid in your support, meaning that not that they're going to say something that doesn't exist in your work, but they are making thoughtful, intentional comments that is useful to, good or bad, in maybe how the comment is framed. It could be good or bad, but it's useful to your growth. That it's not just, I don't like it. Or because these are things that you can hear in a review. I don't like it. Or it's not just, this is great. This is the best work ever.
Both are red flags.
Both are red flags. And I think that this person has to have a specific thought, that they have a comment backing that thought that is impactful, and then gears the conversation for the record-keeping faculty to then say, oh, that makes a good point. This is how I see this and that. It guides the conversation rather than overtakes the conversation. But back to who is actually assigned, you're actually assigned to have your review with. I do think sometimes you have the option to shift your day. So say if you may be initially assigned to go day 1, you could ask to go day 2 or day 3. If you find that there's faculty on that review list that knows your work a bit more, they have more insight on your practice as a whole, so that they're not just coming into the room, seeing the work as it is, but they also know your research from possibly doing studio visits, from having just conversations passing by on campus. They understand you and your thought process and can use that as previous information to inform how they see your work, what is in front of you. So you become more as a wholesome person rather than just this work being the all I know
definitive.
About you as an individual and the work that you can produce. So I think that is one strategy that I personally found was useful for me. And then during your critique, schools allow you to provide synopsis of your exploration of that semester. So is there a way that some of the writing you have done to kind of journal and catalog your experience in the studio, do you have an opportunity to share your thoughts possibly after there's an initial blind survey of what faculty is looking at?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, because
conversations, go ahead, Marlon.
yeah, because some schools, they do allow you to provide a little bit of a synopsis of your work, and then some schools, they just go in there cold. They don't want you to speak at all prior to them looking at the work. So it's a cold read, and they initiate the conversation, and then they forward questions to you. So in any case, though, you want to make sure that you're prepared, and you want to make sure that you have somewhat of an understanding of your work. So I would say it's definitely important to journal throughout the semester. That is a great way to get your thoughts together as far as understanding the context behind your work. So that was a piece of advice that I was encouraged and given by students in I guess upperclassmen. As you create, also journal simultaneously while you create. And during the semester, but most importantly, prior to the end of the semester critique or review, again, those two words are used interchangeably, talking about the same thing. You are able to reflect, you're able to identify patterns, common threads in your work. And that also is a part of the art practice. And that also is work. So you want to have, I would say, 85 to 90% established prior to going into your critique or review. And I say 80 to 90% because you want to still leave room for discussion and discourse and room for improvement. So that's why I give that little 10 to 15% grace as far as not having it all completely together, because essentially that's why what you're in school for. You're in school to get professional feedback on the work that you're doing.
Absolutely. And a question that I felt was pivotal that someone shared with me and that I would like to share with the listeners is, what were you exploring this semester? Can you answer that question in your review and have these conceptual thoughts through whether you're reading, through your personal experience, through your exploration in material? What is the foundation of your exploration? And can you verbalize that in this context of the conversation? And I think having that as like a goal of when you're journaling, when you are noting down what it is that you've been working on, as what you then need to be able to share during this review, during this critique, as a part of your goal, I think it makes your work in the studio a bit more complete, because you are really focused on digging deeper into what's the point of this, right?
Definitely. So I kind of want to ask too, is I want to take us back, right? Take us back to our first semester reviews. So Chris, what do you, from first semester, not just overall, because we have a lot of opinions about reviews and critiques overall from those experiences, but how do you reflect on your first end of the semester review from grad school?
Yeah, I think my first semester review in grad school, it wasn't particularly hard, but it also, the comments were particularly informing. Like, all I can remember is someone saying, "Did Jamaica have indigenous people?"
Oh, I remember that. That was
Talk
and that
about
was one of the
shock.
first that was one of the first questions too.
That was one of the first questions of my critique. And so starting off the conversation like that, I was like, what the? Like, do I need to offer a history course as well with my work? Like, oh my God, what am I getting into?
Yeah, that was definitely problematic. But something that I really also loved about your work
Yeah.
from not necessarily the critique, because the critique was loaded. It became even more loaded after that first question. But what
Yeah.
I really liked about you, the work that you provided for your first critique was those 2 to 3 streams of thought, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You're a very interdisciplinary artist. I'm like a painter drawer that explores other interdisciplinary mediums. But I remember you had like 3 or 4 streams of thought. You had some sculptures.
Mm-hmm.
You had, what else did you have?
I had the huge fiber piece when I started to play with the baby
So
clothes.
yeah, so that I would say was your most groundbreaking work that really
Yeah.
set you on your trajectory. And I think you had a third one, didn't you? You had like a third
I
series
had
of
a
work.
puppet. Remember I had a puppet that I was playing
Yes,
with? Yeah. Yeah, I had one of those
yes.
sculpture puppets. Yeah.
So, and what I remember about your critique is that because of this breadth of work and this variation of work that you had, the faculty were able to kind of focus you in or zero in on what was most successful about
Mm-hmm.
the most successful pieces about your work. And also was very encouraging for them it gave them room to encourage you to focus a little bit more on certain projects that will
Yeah.
be most prolific during thesis.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's true, which was interesting, as you say that, because it makes me think back to one of the last critiques I had, which felt very opposite to what that first critique was. And
Mhm.
I say this to say because I felt like I was encouraged to continue the work with the fabric works where I'm using all this repurposed material. But then at the end, one of my last critiques, it's almost like I was being told I was like a one-hit wonder. Like, is this all you can do? And so, which is why in my thesis, I had no fiber work.
You didn't. You didn't. And for a minute, well, I thought because you were being represented by that point, so I thought all of the fiberworks had gone to the gallery. But
Which
I
is
didn't know
partially
that.
true, but I was also a bit like,
Let me show you, right?
I ain't no one hit wonder here, baby. That's not all I can do. So
I would.
that's yeah, that was I was in my feelings a lot by then as well, which that's a whole nother thing. But first semester, I have to say that, you know, I didn't feel like it was a bad critique. Like I felt that there was a lot to talk about. And like you said, I had all these things, these thoughts I was moving through and works that could show that. And I was able to verbalize that. But I felt that I could tell there was more conversation around works than others. But I didn't feel like I was able to really be nourished by conceptually. Like I felt like the
Hmm.
thoughts that I was having about the work, like I needed support in what research to look at to really give me more insight as to how to make the work grow.
Hmm.
I learned that really quickly. But tell me about you, Marlon. Let me hear what your experience was for your first semester.
I felt like you described it the best way one time when we were in grad school. I just felt like just a I was in the middle of an ocean, just kind of floundering, you know? Um,
Mm,
I went into grad school first with the goal to learn how to paint because I mainly come from a jars background.
mm-hmm,
I had done up until that point a lot of work with oil pastels.
mm-hmm,
I minored in fine art in undergrad, and I remember I really wanted to take this oil painting course, but I never could take it because it always interfered with my major graphic design courses. So that was a part of a mission. I wasn't necessarily thinking completely conceptually about the work, and I feel like I kind of stumbled across it after my first semester in my first review. The work that
Mm-hmm.
I made, because I was learning how to paint and trying to figure that out and not really getting the guidance that I was from the faculty, I thought it was all trash. Looking back at it in hindsight,
Yeah.
it was a lot of like test and trial and error.
Yeah.
They seemed to support it, and they seemed to still provide some type of feedback. For me, I'm kind of surprised that they were able to. But I think how they were able to do that is that I also came in with a certain amount of confidence and sureness, even though I had no idea what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
I'd actually talked to a third year that
Mm-hmm.
talked about body language.
Yeah.
So I didn't necessarily have the parameters to kind of move the conversation, but I at least had a way, I at least knew how to position myself in the room and how to
Mm-hmm.
engage with the faculty to try to pull out some really great takeaways from my work. But I will say that all of my work from my first semester, I they are buried under a lot of my stuff. Not very proud of
Growing
it.
pains, growing pains,
Oh, it
growing
was painful.
pains.
And it was painful. It was painful to watch. But
Yeah,
actually, no,
yeah,
actually, I retract some of that because there was actually one painting. There was
yeah.
one painting that I didn't think was as successful. And then I had to learn why I had to learn that it was successful. And they gave me context as to why it was successful. And I would say off of that one painting, and I made a lot of trash paintings. I think I made about maybe 15 really trash paintings. But there was this one painting that the faculty consistently or agreed that this was very successful.
Mm-hmm.
Was and based off of that one painting, I was able to kind of steer myself further into my practice or into my eh,
Thesis.
yeah.
But you know what I find, which is so good about that, is one thing they were good at was painting. Like most of the faculty, their expertise was a lot of like people that were either interested in painting or painting. The most influential faculty were in that realm. So to be able to say what was working in your painting seems right on par with what even most of the people coming out of the program that were best supported were doing,
True, very
painting.
true, very true, very true. They were very, very knowledgeable in painting.
Extremely knowledgeable in painting. So some of these as additional, maybe complex, more new thought processes that are not conventional to what they've experienced prior is all new for them.
Right, true. And I think that because of that, especially in your case, and you were really good at this, because we saw that our faculty was very painter two-dimensional dense as far as their expertise. You were
Mm-hmm.
really great at recognizing that and also moving forward, creating parameters for the faculty. So,
Mm-hmm.
can you just talk a little bit about that? Because in grad school, I remember just being blown away at how much control you had in the room during your critiques. And I think that's because you set parameters.
Yes. So from that very first critique, I realized that faculty often goes on tangents. So being prepared with specific questions to bring to faculty helps them to keep on track, which not only leads to your success of learning something from that conversation, but essentially their success for actually helping you. And so, so I, as I said before, the conversation for my first review was neither really good or really bad. Outside of some of those comments that really showed that they had no idea what Jamaica, the history about Jamaica and my background in entirely. They tangentially know that there's a lot of immigrants here and I'm one from Jamaica, but as to what what is my culture and anything about the culture and some of his history, that there was a gap there for sure. So having that understanding, which I could have only really grasped from having the review, I realized that I had to give them this bracket that they needed to live within in the conversation. And I did that by, well, one, I was very strategic in the works that I started to share. I started to lessen how many various concepts I was presenting and started to really niche down to, from the 3 or 4, 1 or 2. And within that 1 or 2 works, 1 or 2 concepts of thought, I would have maybe about 5 or 6 works across the board in that realm, of which shows how I'm working with material, how I am experimenting in these various ways of making, whether new ways or old ways that I'm perfecting or being more successful at doing. And then after they've done their blind look and they, say all these various things that they want to say initially about the work in the first 15 minutes, I take the other half. Because often the review was, I would say they would talk randomly for about 30 minutes. and then for the last bit, which would be like about 20 minutes or so, I would then have these very specific questions that I've already prepared that I wanted to ask. And I would also, to some of their random comments or even questions that they would forward to me, I've already tried to prepare or think through what are the potentials of what they would ask me, and have these thoughts comments of how I would respond. So I would share reasonable vulnerabilities of the artwork with faculty.
Now, when you mean reasonable, can you break that down? Reasonable?
Reasonable, yes,
yeah.
I can. So reasonable vulnerabilities would be like, okay, say in my that repurposed fabric works, I would say that I'm currently only using the zigzag stitch to mend together these fabrics to make the whole image. What do you think would be the significance of broadening that? Should I be using multiple stitches? Should I continue to use that one? See, that would be a question that would share a vulnerability that I'm not sure about this particular thing. What are your suggestions to help me figure out which direction I should go? And why do you think that this direction has more value than maybe another direction?
Okay, so we're not talking about you walking in there being like, I was in a full-on depression during this time period, and through my depression, and I tried to create this work, but it was a real struggle, and I was crying 2 minutes before I got here, and that is why this work may seem incomplete. We're not talking about those vulnerabilities.
Oh, no, my friend. Those vulnerabilities will not help you in the critique. It will only hinder you. Those type of vulnerabilities, not saying that they're not the real situation that you may be experiencing. The critique space, again, it is a spectacle. It is not the place to be putting your heart and soul in to that capacity, because they will tap dance on that. They're going to tap dance on that. It will only be a pain point that will just constantly prodded to the end of that critique if you don't mind sharp. So I I personally think a reasonable vulnerability is sharing how a particular way you're using material you are uncertain about, a particular thought that you had based on an experience. So, for instance, I have shared within my critique that I currently have a very tough relationship with my mom, which is the foundation of the work that I am talking about. And it fuels this exploration I'm currently having. But I don't go into details. Don't need to know that. Nobody needs to know that. Like, they don't need to know the details. The work is as far as I'd like to go on those details. And the work that I'm creating is celebrating the parts of this relationship that I adore and what was the common ground about us. But sharing that detail helps to give context. And so then it could be that the faculty could say, maybe there's a comment that I had, I remember in critique, where I was told that there isn't enough tension in the work. And I found that was helpful because I disclosed that I'm currently I have a tough relationship with my mom, but they couldn't see that in the work. It's like, even though I was sharing the good parts, the parts that are of the relationship that are from the past that have been really good, they couldn't see that there is also a tension currently. So how could the work actually also showcase that tension without spilling all my business on the streets? So that comment, I thought, was one of the great advices that I got from critiques, because of strategically sharing a vulnerability that gave context to why I was doing what I was doing.
I love that. I love that. And it's, again, steering the conversation so it is a productive conversation, and that you're taking away a lot of great feedback that you can apply. Right. But yes. I mean, there is always those one or two faculty members that just can't help but talk about their point of view or look at the work from strictly their point of view and just go completely way off base where you were trying to go on the work. And I don't know if they're doing it intentionally to intentionally try to steer you away from, or try to challenge you in looking at your work, or trying to make you think like them. But it's very important to also find, or also create ways to kind of push that back.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think the only way that you're able to do that is if you yourself have a clear understanding as to, at the foundation, why am I making what I'm making? Why am I doing what I'm doing? And so if you're able to answer that, oftentimes whatever direction you want to take with the work is guided by that in mind, that I'm making this choice because I'm trying to show X, Y, and Z. And so in a critique, if there's a consistent comment that's, being harped on that you have no interest in, find a great way to divert unwanted conversations, which was a tactic that I had. And I would say something to the realm of, thank you for sharing that point. However, I'm not quite interested in that specific thing right now, or however you'd like to say the thing that they are trying to. It's okay to deny advice.
To say you're not interested. It is okay to say I am not interested in that. And a lot of it's interesting because I discovered that you can say that. Watching a lot of artist interviews or artist talks, they overtly say, they clearly state, I am not interested in that aspect or in that subject matter. That does not apply in this work that I'm building. So even in a critique or review where you're essentially being judged by your faculty and maybe they're trying to put themes onto your work, it is completely okay and completely appropriate to say, I'm not interested in that.
Yes, I think that one sentence gives you so much power to create the parameters of what is your work and what isn't your work, that the next couple things that they're going to say is going to be a bit more thoughtful, because
Mm,
they're not going to be just throwing the whole bag at you. They're going to be, it's now starting to frame what is their work and what isn't their work. And unless you have said that, they won't know.
definitely. And I also want to go back to confidence. So I didn't have the language to conceptualize my work. But again, one strength that I take away from, or that I took away from my first review, is to go in there with a certain level of confidence in agency,
Mm-hmm.
and reminding myself that I have agency during the critique. It's
Mm-hmm.
very important to position yourself. Body language is also very key. I remember the advice that this third year had given me was, when a faculty member is talking to you or directing questions at you, make sure to make turn to them, make maybe a half a step forward to them, and have eye contact with them. So that
Mm,
kind that in it's like subconsciously kind of levels the playing field. So now I'm
right.
looking at you as my equal, and now we're having a discussion
Mm-hmm.
between you and me. What that does is that narrows the amount of people that you're engaging with down, because I know it can be
Yes.
very sometimes
Intimidating.
intimidating. Yes,
Right.
that's a great word, to be in front of a full room of people. So when
Mm-hmm.
you're making eye contact and you're positioning your body with that one person that's asking you this question, that can also kind of decrease the amount of anxiety that you have being in front of all these people. And you can kind of just see, I'm engaging with this one person at a time. And also stand up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Keep your stance. And it's interesting because our first semester, for the first semester reviews, now it's an
Yeah.
all department review. That's how it was
Yeah.
structured at our school.
Mm-hmm.
So it was maybe 1 day and a half of the first years, and then another day
Mm-hmm.
and a half of the second years, and then, well, it was pretty much just the first years and the second years. And the third years, they had their own committees and had their own committee meetings with their committee members.
Right.
I remember, and I think this was also after my review, when I thought I felt really good about my body language. There was the
Mm-hmm.
second year, and I don't know what they were going through, but they had all these little paintings, and the faculty was just ripping through all of them, not literally,
Yeah.
but
With their words. With their
their
words.
their critiques were less than favorable. And
Right.
what ended up
Yeah.
happening to the student, though, is he literally started almost to shrink. Like, he went from standing up to, it got to one point where he was sitting in the corner of the
Yeah.
opposite end of the room.
They were
And
really deflated. It's
he,
understandable.
extremely deflated. But
Yeah.
I also think it's important not to let yourself get to that point. We are artists, we are sensitive about our stuff, but this process is also about defending why you think this work is important. And
Yeah.
you cannot go up in there feeling so sensitive about your work and feeling so attached to your work to the point where you're in a corner just gripping on for dear life. So I don't want to laugh because it was sad to look at,
Yeah. Yeah.
but you definitely want to make sure that your stance is as confident as how you feel about the work.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. I think that there's always a way, even if it's not, again, we don't know what that student was going through that time, but even if it's not your most confident work that you've made, find a way to still stand behind it. It is your work. You made it, you showed it. We got to still find some way to be confident about it. So I totally agree with your comments. We should always remember that the process of a critique in grad school is to prepare you for professional practice outside of school. Within the critique handbook, I'm going to read this segment that I thought was quite poignant. It shares, the ritual which occurs in the artificial setting of a classroom art studio among students and art faculty often becomes an end in itself, a goal towards which each student production is aimed. But the critique is not a singular goal or deadline. Rather, it is one of many, part of a series of cadences that partition the semester into sections of creative productivity. Thus, the critique is both a deadline and a marker for a perpetual beginning, a freeze frame moment in the context of a continuous studio practice. In a sense, this is carried beyond art school into the professional practice when the critique within university is replaced by the curator's studio visit, another ritual of judgment and selection, a subsequent exhibition, and finally, the press review. I think this is pivotal because it means that we need to find ways to stand our ground in practice, in university, and then stand our ground with the curator or your gallery, and then stand your ground if you get to the point of having a review, with a critiquer. So having this in mind, that this is all a part of preparation for the real world, puts it into context that all these little conversations we have here right now, yeah, them words might hurt me a little bit, but the real world is when my rent is based on having a great conversation with this curator to sell some work to pay my bills.
Mm-hmm.
And you gotta believe in your work, because that's how they gonna believe in your work, right?
Exactly.
So yeah.
Critiques, they aren't meant to make you feel great, but it's also important to understand that it's also a training for you, the artist, to provide explanation and to practice explanation behind the meaning of your work as well. And through school, it's also a place where you can learn how to make work with more intention. But with critiques, though, like you said, Chris, it's also important to learn how to back up your work.
Yeah,
and how to deal with confidence.
Yes, I would caveat the word explanation. I feel like it's more in the lines of creating parameters, boundaries for your work. And because the boundaries doesn't necessarily say it says what the work is and what it isn't, but maybe not fully. It just gives it a realm to live in, if that makes sense. While explanation, I feel, is a little bit more definitive. At least for me, my comments around my work is more, or my defense of my work is the words that I say around my work is a defense, is a statement for my thoughts and how these thoughts are then presented visually. But that is something that a faculty member shared with me in conversation in a studio visit during grad school, that caution explaining everything. Caution explaining everything. It's more important to understand what thoughts brought you to that place than having a reason for everything, every decision and everything that's done in the creation of the work. So I would more think of it as parameters as to what the work lives within.
Nice. I love that. All right, so we are at that point again where we want to hear from you, the listeners. Join us on Discord, the link found in our show description, to share your thoughts on these two questions. 1, what strategies have you adopted to get the most out of your critique? And 2, when critiquing others' work, What do you consider or look out for?
Thank you for listening to our episode. The Hidden Critique is produced and hosted by us, Krystle Lemonias and Marlon Tobias. Episodes are edited by Kirsten Pettifor. Original music composed by Cesar Presa.
If you like the show, you can review and rate this podcast via Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You can also like, subscribe, and comment on our YouTube page.
For exclusive bonus content, subscribe to our Patreon at The Hidden Critique.
Or join the Hidden Critiques Discord page to engage directly with us, the host, and build community with fellow listeners.